In this video, you'll learn a basic stone setting for the Faceted Gems shot plate die from Pottery USA. First, we're going to begin by melting a small little nugget of silver to use in the impression die. We're going to press the design solid so that we have enough material and structure for the stone setting. Here I'm just melting some silver scrap in a depression in a charcoal block. I carved the depression using a ball burr in my flex shaft. I'm just going to heat evenly until all the scrap melts into one liquid blob. And I'm just eyeballing the amount I'm going to need here, guessing to see how much, silver I will need to fill that depression that makes up the impression die. So once it's fully melted, it kind of turns into a perfect little circle and it starts kind of shimmering. And that's when you know it's fully melted. And then you just need to wait for it to cool and then it's ready to use. So here I have my little silver nugget and my impression die, and I'm going to go ahead and press that nugget into the impression die in the press. I'm using a tool steel pusher and I'm making sure that the area I'm pressing is what's centered in the press. This particular die has two dies, it has two impressions pressed on the surface of the die. And I need to make sure that I'm not centering the die itself, but the area that's receiving pressure. So wherever my silver nugget is, that's what I'm centering. And I'm just going to rotate and press, and then take a look at it and see how far I got. So it looks like I'm just missing some of the detail on the very top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to my jeweler's bench and I'm going to trim off the excess metal around the perimeter of the impression. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove a lot of the excess metal and it will force the pressure to go down into the die rather than spreading outwards. So now, you can see I still have a couple millimeters of thickness of metal sticking out above the impression die. And I'm going to use the tool steel pusher to continue to push this metal down into the die so I can fill that deepest central portion of the impression. And I'm just pressing and rotating and pressing and rotating. And then I'm going to check and see what the impression looks like. And it looks like now I've gotten the full detail of the die and I can be finished pressing. So now I'm going to go ahead and head back over to my jeweler's bench and use my jeweler's saw to cut the border around this stone setting. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the saw to remove all of that excess metal. And then once I've got it all cut out, I'm going to use a file to further refine the edges and just remove, continue removing the extra metal from the border. So now I'm done filing and sanding and I'm ready to figure out the setting for the stone. So here I have a 6mm CZ and I'm just going to set it down in this area and kind of check out where things stand. So obviously my area is not deep enough. I don't have enough room for the stone yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and work on that. Here I'm using a caliper to make sure I know the measurement of my stone, because just because you bought a 6mm stone doesn't necessarily mean that it's exactly 6mm. And my first step in carving out this stone setting is to use a ball burr. So here I have a ball burr that is just slightly smaller than the size of my stone. Just a hair. You could use a ball burr that's the same size as the stone or slightly smaller, but you don't want it to be significantly smaller, and you definitely don't want it to be bigger. You're going to need a ball burr and a stone setting burr. And both of these you want either the exact same size as your stone or just a hair smaller. So here I've got my ball burr. I'm going to make sure I lubricate it, and I'm going to use that to remove the bulk of the metal in this area where my stone needs to sit. And if you have thermal plastic, thermal lock, jet set, any of those things that can help you hold your stone in place so that you're not having to use your fingers like this, that's great. I wanted to do this demonstration with as few tools as possible. So I'm just holding it in my hands here, but definitely use those things if you have them to help you out. I'm also going to drill a small hole in the bottom of my stone setting for a couple of reasons. It lets in a little bit of light. It means I can clean the stone later. It means I can pop the stone in and out of the setting without worrying about getting it stuck. And then I'm going to continue to use that ball burr to remove the bulky metal from the inside of this stone setting. And just make sure that you're going nice and slow. If you go super fast, everything heats up and you'll dull your burrs, and that's sad because burrs are expensive. So just make sure you go nice and slow and use lubrication. And you might notice that I'm rotating my stone setting. I'm just doing that to make sure that I'm cutting evenly. I'm not leaning to one side. And I'm trying to hold my burr as perpendicular to the setting as I can. So now I'm going to drop the stone in there and just check the fit, see kind of how things are. My stone is still sitting much too high in the setting. So I'm going to continue with the ball burr, removing more material and just making room for that stone to sit down in that setting. So you can see I'm just continuing to rotate and drill a bit of that metal out with the burr. I'm going to check again and see how it sits. It's definitely sitting much lower in the setting, and I think I'm going to stop here and move to the stone setting burr. Stone setting burrs have a 90-degree angle, which matches the angle of the bottom of the stone. So I'm going to go ahead and use the stone setting burr to continue cutting the seat for the stone. Remember to hold the flex shaft perpendicular to the stone setting and go slow with the burr. What we're doing is we're cutting out an area for the girdle to rest, while leaving a lip of metal that we can then push over the top of that edge of the stone. So you want to make sure that when you place your stone down in that setting that it's sitting straight, it's not lopsided, and that it's sitting low enough that there's metal that you can push over the top edge. You don't want so much metal that you're covering your stone, just enough to hold it in place. And then once I have my seat cut, I'm going to go ahead and solder a jump ring onto this so that I can attach it to an earring or a chain or whatever I want to do. So I've just fluxed my piece and my jump ring. I'm going to add a little tiny pallion of solder, heat everything up. Remember, this is solid metal, this impression, so it's going to take a lot more heat than this tiny little jump ring. So really just focus the heat on the impression, and then the jump ring will heat up naturally as you heat the impression because they're touching. And then as soon as the solder flows, you're done and you can pickle and clean. There we go. And then once everything's pickled and cleaned, you're ready to set the stone. Generally, it's best practice to polish the inside of the stone setting before you set the stone. I'm going to go ahead and skip that part since this is just a demo, but you should know that giving a high shine on the inside of the stone setting is definitely a good idea. So I'm just using a pusher here to make sure my stone is resting in that setting nice and straight. just kind of seating it in there. If it doesn't seat straight, you need to get the stone setting burr back out and cut your seat and even things up. So there was just one side that was sitting a little high. I'm seeing if pushing it down will do the trick or if I need to recut. And I think it looks okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step, which is setting the stone. I'm going to use a hammer handpiece for this because this metal is pretty thick. And so if you've done bezel setting, it's basically the same thing. I'm going to push on opposite sides from each other, kind of north, south, and then east, west, just kind of tapping small bits of metal over the edge of the stone for now. And I'm going to do that at 8 points, always working on opposite sides. And then once I've got my 8 points set, I can work my way all the way around the stone in a circular pattern. This particular tip for the hammer handpiece, I'm not really sure what it has been used for before. It's not one that I prepared myself, and it doesn't have a very nice face on it. You definitely will have less work for yourself if your hammer handpiece has a tip with a nice polished face on it. This one doesn't, so it's just going to require a little bit of finishing work after the fact, but that's okay. So you can see I'm just going around in a circle using the hammer handpiece to slowly compress the metal around the edge of the stone. It's acting as a tiny hammer. And just creating a lip over the top edge of the girdle. And again, if you have some thermoplastic or Thermalock or something like that, that can be really helpful. If you have a ball vise for engraving, it really helps with holding your pieces while you're stone setting. But I wanted to show this demo with basic tools. Okay, so my stone's in there. You might have noticed before I was using the hammer handpiece kind of at an angle, pushing the metal like towards the stone and also over, and now I'm coming directly from above and just pushing down. Just smoothing out that top edge and forcing the metal straight down basically onto the stone. And I'm just working my way around in a circle. Okay, and because I was using that kind of odd tip on the hammer handpiece, I have a little bit of extra finishing work to do. I'm using a barrette file to file the top edge of my bezel smooth. A barrette file has a cutting surface on the flat side, but no cutting surface on the edges or the top. So I'm using that to smooth things out, and then I'm going to switch to a pumice wheel in my flex shaft. So this is a medium grit pumice wheel. It won't mess with the CZ, and I can use that to just further refine the top edge of that bezel. And then once I'm through with the pumice, I'm going to switch to a polishing wheel. And this particular one is a green shofu. It's a high polish. Whoop, lost my piece. High polish wheel for the flex shaft. And then I'm ready to take it over to the polishing motor and finish it off. So I'm just going to use a bit of red rouge here to put a bright shine on the silver, and then we'll be finished for the demo. You can also use small wheels in the flex shaft if you don't have a polishing motor. And that's it. That's a simple way to set a stone in our Faceted Gems shot plate die. I hope you enjoyed, and that's all for now.